Hi, everybody. Welcome to golly. Welcome to WTF Wednesdays, True Crime Live. It is Wednesday, April 24th, and a little bit chilly today, so I decided not to go down to the studio. I decided to stay up in the house where it was a little more cozy. So today we have the case of the Kissell brothers. And let me get that out of my ear. And this really is a case of blood because they're brothers, money because they were both very wealthy, and murder because they were both murdered within 3 years of each other, if you can believe it. Well, hi, Lethargy. How are you? Welcome. So let's get started on this case, shall we? Well, hi, Tish. How are you? Welcome. So we're just getting started on the case of the Kissell brothers. And there you go. These two guys, they grew up pretty well off. Their dad, Bill, he was a tinkerer of sorts, right? And he had a company called, I want to call it Syntax, but that isn't right, Syntax. And what that company did was it made toner for copiers. And it really took off. And so Bill was able to provide a wonderful lifestyle for Rob and Andrew, their younger sister, Jane, and his wife, Elaine. They lived in New Jersey, but they also had a vacation home in Vermont. They were all avid skiers. They were very competitive. The brothers were especially competitive. The taller one that you're going to see on the left, that's actually the younger brother. That's Rob, Robert Kissell. And Andrew, or Andy, is the shorter one. He's the older one on the right. Lots of competition between these guys. But people that grew up with them said that Rob was, he was just easier to like. He was just readily likable. He seemed to be really good at everything he did, and didn't seem to require a whole lot of effort on his part. Things just seemed to come easy for him. He was kind of a golden boy. And Andrew, well, I'll say it this way. One of their schoolmates said that Andrew's personality was just kind of monotone, or I would probably refer to it as flatline. And another person that went to school with them said that if you wanted to find something good in Andrew, you could, but it first would take a lot of effort on your part to really decide that you were going to like him. And if you didn't decide that you were going to like Andrew and put effort into that, you weren't going to find a whole lot of good in him. Well, hi, Trish. I'm going to have to watch it because, once again, I have Tish and Trish in here. So Rob was a lot more low-key. Their father, Bill, at some point gave them each credit cards. And he said that the first purchase that Rob made was to go to Sears and buy a pretty cheap pair of tennis shoes at Sears. And Andrew, on the other hand, went and bought a fur coat. And when Andrew left high school, their father had look, obviously, Bill was their dad was a self-made man. And he expected a lot from his son. And when Andrew left high school, he didn't go right to university. He actually started his own business. And then after a couple years, he wound his way to university for a little bit. But everybody that knew these two brothers said that Andrew was the one always looking for the shortcut. He wanted the wealth. He wanted the things, but he didn't really want to put a lot of effort into getting them. He was going to find the shortest route to get what he wanted. And he didn't seem to have any scruples about how he got there. Rob, on the other hand, followed the rules. Rob went to college, then he turned around and he got a graduate degree. He did it in it was finance, and in fact, well, hi, Ronnie Lynn, and in fact, one of their childhood friends said, you know, whenever we would play Monopoly as kids, Rob was always the banker, and Andrew was always the realtor guy. And that's the path that they followed in life, actually. Rob, when he graduated, he ended up getting a job with, eventually he got a job with Goldman Sachs. He was kind of considered a financial genius. He was very coveted. Yes, and well, Tish, I don't know that I would call Andrew a slumlord, but I'll tell you this: he sure cut corners. That's for sure. He cut corners because the more that he could cut corners, the more went into his pocket, right? Now, like I said, these two brothers just couldn't. Well, Tish, listen, you're not far from it. You're not far from it, okay? So don't cut yourself short. Now, like I said, Rob, he eventually became an investment banker. Oh, there they are when they were growing up. Okay, that's Rob again on the left. Even though he was younger, he was taller. And that's Jane, their sister, in the middle. Andrew in the blue shirt. And there is Andrew in a school picture in the middle. And Rob, I think that was his senior year picture. And there's Rob going to the prom with his girlfriend at the time. And his girlfriend, there's a dateline that I think most of you will be able to find on YouTube about these guys. And she still speaks really, really fondly of Rob. And then I read a New Yorker article about them, about the brothers, and what happened to them. And one of Andrew's girlfriends was in that article. She gave an interview to the person that wrote it, and she said, he was generous because he was really into Andrew was very into appearances, and because friends didn't come as easily to Andrew as they did to Rob. Andrew, I think, felt the need to be flashier. He did, he does kind of look like Robert Pattinson in that in that picture. He sure does. Um, and she said, when that she and Andrew had gone out for about 4 years, and she was saying that she wanted to get a car, and he turned around and bought her a car. And she she had to work on it, with him, but she still thought, wow, she got to go around and say that her boyfriend bought her this car when she was pretty young. But that's how I think Andrew perceived things, is that he had to buy to impress, and he liked to collect things. And I almost get the feeling that, his girlfriends and later on his wife, uh, were they were a part of his collection of things that he used to impress people. So maybe if I had read uh, the New Yorker article years and years and years and years and years ago, before I saw a Lifetime movie made about these guys called um, The Two Mr. Kissells, I might have thought, when I read that he bought his girlfriend a car when he was young and she was young, I probably would have thought, oh wow, what a guy. But I had done too much research, and I'd seen that movie so long ago, and it was intriguing, and I tried to find it for you guys. I couldn't get it here in the US, but that doesn't mean that you guys won't be able to find it where you are, because I really wanted to watch it again. It's very good. John Stamos actually plays Andrew, and I can't remember the guy that plays Rob, but really good movie. And I saw it years ago. I think it was made maybe 2007, 2008. Okay, and it was a Lifetime movie. So, anyways, I wasn't impressed when I found out that Andrew had bought his girlfriend a car, because I thought, well, there he is again. He was just a very superficial guy. Where Robert here just seemed to be a lot more grounded. Now, let's get to that next slide. There the brothers are again. I mean, they're good-looking guys. Good-looking guys seem to have everything they wanted in the world. I think that I think his parents would have equally paid for Andrew to go to school if that was the route that he really wanted to go. He dabbled, but he didn't. Andrew never wanted to do the work that was required. Well, hi, Mary Lou. How are you? Welcome. Now, eventually, Rob met Nancy. And Nancy, she came from a much more modest background than Rob did. She had held a variety of jobs when they met. She had managed a restaurant and a cab company, but they moved in together very quickly, and they were married a couple of years later. And by all accounts, everyone said that they were very, very, very happy. They eventually had 3 children, and they ran in some pretty, you can see right there who they're with, they ran in some pretty elite crowds. Now, what happened was China was in a bit of a financial crisis, and Goldman Sachs sent Rob. They really were. I mean, they seemed to just have it all, and they were known as like a power couple. Goldman Sachs sent Rob to China, to Hong Kong, because China was in the midst of a financial crisis. And at the time, you could buy up real estate over there. things that were in foreclosure, uh, literally pennies on the dollar. And you could turn around and sell it for 2, 3 times as much. And Rob was just really, really good at that. So they went over to Hong Kong, and this place that they were in, let me see if I can remember the name of it. This is where they were put up. And it was at the time, what is that place? I think it was called Taylam. Taylam. And it really is almost like a very elaborate and exclusive resort, but it's homes, it's apartment homes, and it's mostly full of expats, and they were in an apartment that cost $20,000 a month, which is mind-blowing. But it said that for a lot of the expats or people like Robert Kissell that were over there working, for the men that go over there for work, their lives don't change that much because they're at work, and especially if you're a financial investment banker. You're not working 8 hours a day. You're working 10, 12 hours a day. Sometimes you're still working when you come home. So all that kind of changes for them is the office, right? For the wives, it's huge. You have to figure out where the grocery stores are and how to get the kids in school and make new friends, and where to shop, and where to shop for your clothes, and where to shop for your husband. But if you lived here, you didn't have to worry so much about it, because there was a kindergarten here, there were tennis courts, there was a huge supermarket, there were pools. You didn't have to leave, is what a lot of the women have said about this. You didn't have to leave. Everything that you wanted could be taken care of. And of course, if you were that wealthy, they could just be brought to you, right? Now, what happened while they're there? Of course, they had gone over with one child. They had 2 more while they were there. But then the SARS outbreak came. Does anybody remember SARS? I think it was maybe 2002, 2003. There was that huge SARS outbreak, and SARS was kind of, it's very similar to COVID. People were dying at an alarming rate. And one thing about China is it is very densely populated. So it was hard. One of their biggest crises, I guess, there is not even really having enough livable space for everybody, which is why they just continue to build up. And the apartments, for most people that aren't as wealthy as Rob and Nancy, those apartments are not large at all. And so people that had money left, if they could. Rob couldn't leave, but he and Nancy decided she needed to leave and go back to the States with the children until the SARS outbreak was over, or at least was under control. And they still owned this very lavish home in Vermont. So Nancy takes the 3 kids. She goes to Vermont. And the Vermont house was a ski home. And it wasn't really meant to be lived in all the time. That wasn't the purpose. That wasn't the reason that they had it. It was a getaway. And Nancy, the kids kind of started to get restless because you can't ski in Vermont year-round. And so she decided that she was going to build an addition to the home, a really big kind of home theater that would entertain her and entertain the kids and their friends and keep everybody happy. And the contractor that they hired to install the TVs and make sure everything was up and running for the home theater, he was sick one day, the contractor, and so he sent his brother. And his brother's name was Michael Del Priore, and he was a twice divorced electrical repairman. He would do some work for his brother, who was a contractor from time to time. And he lived in a trailer park at the time, and him and old Nancy hit it off. Nancy took a shine to Michael, and they started to have an affair. And Rob, even though she's in Vermont, he's over in Hong Kong, he's getting a feeling that something's going on here. So what he does, because he can't see, he can't leave, he can't ask them to come back, so he hires a private investigator. And lo and behold, the private investigator confirms that Nancy and the electrician are having an affair. Now, eventually, SARS did simmer down. It did get under control, and it was safe for Nancy and the children to go back to Hong Kong. So that's what they did in early 2003. Nancy returned to Hong Kong and to their apartment there. But she didn't break things off all the way with Michael. She got a burner phone, so she'd make phone calls to him. She would send emails to him all the time. And Rob had said to the private investigator, I don't want to bring the affair up to her because I don't want to push her. I don't want her to leave. He was worth a sizable fortune, especially, Mary Lou said, were the brothers close? You know, Mary Lou, I don't think so. They were extremely competitive. Rob had natural, he was just naturally likable. He was, I think some would say, better looking. That's him on the right. He got better grades. He was better at sports. He had more friends. He was considered the best looking guy in the high school. He didn't seem to have to try very hard for anything he did. And Andrew, not so much. That just wasn't the case for Andrew. Nothing seemed to come easily for him. And he had a lot of promise. He wanted to do a lot of things. But because it didn't come as easily for him as it did for his brother, he just wanted to take the shortcuts to it. It said that in school he struggled, where Rob just kind of sailed. And equally they had a bit of a contentious relationship with their dad. That it was difficult. That at different points for each of these guys, they stopped speaking to their father. There was a time when Robert nobody was allowed to even mention his father's name. Bill could not even be referenced in Robert's presence. So I don't think they were close. I think they competed for a lot of things, and I especially think on Andrew's side of it that he was really resentful of his younger brother. I think it was jealousy. I think there was a lot of envy there, but I think that made him resent his younger brother because everything just seemed to fall right into Rob's lap. So Nancy goes back, and now she's not with Michael, her lover, but she's still really carrying on an affair. But because Michael's not there in Hong Kong, though I did read that it was said that Rob had actually considered bringing Michael to Hong Kong and just kind of turning a blind eye to it to appease Nancy. I don't know if that's true. It seems very odd to me that a husband, would get his wife back to China and has left her lover behind in the States, and then the husband's going to bring the lover over. I don't get that one. It wouldn't happen in my marriage. I'm gonna tell you that. Yeah, he's either very understanding, Tish, or some of the things that Nancy later accused Rob of were true, and it would have been a way for Rob to appease Nancy while he did his own things. But we're going to get there. So it didn't happen, but it was written that he considered it. Things were getting pretty bad between them. And even though they kept up appearances, there wasn't really anybody that said that either one of them, they weren't complaining to family about one another. They weren't complaining to friends or acquaintances about one another. But things weren't going well. Rob did eventually have a company come in and install some spyware on their computers because he suspected that Nancy was emailing Michael still, and he wanted that proof, and sure enough, she was. And later, that spyware, it kind of ended up to be a way of Rob kind of speaking from the grave, if you will. Things started to get really pretty rocky between them, and Rob had allegedly offered Nancy half of everything that he had in a divorce, and she turned him down, allegedly. And then it's said that he decided that was it. And he was just going to tell Nancy, that's it. I'm filing for divorce, and I'm going to take the kids. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you don't even get anything close to half. So in late 2003, Rob is at home. He's home from work a little bit early. He's watching his children, specifically his daughter, having a play date with another little girl that lives in this complex here. And He's got a work phone call a little bit later, and the little girl, the father of the playmate, comes to pick up his child and sits down to talk with Rob for a few minutes. And Nancy calls the girls into the kitchen, and she has made milkshakes, and she has her daughter and the other little girl go serve these milkshakes to their fathers. And the father of the playmate, who's oddly enough, his name was Andrew, he said the milkshakes tasted really funny. They tasted strawberries and bananas and cookies and something else. And when he asked Nancy, what is this? She said, oh, that's a special Halloween recipe with secret ingredients. Finishes his milkshake, gets his daughter, they go home. As soon as he walks into his apartment, he sits down on the couch and passes out. And his wife can't wake him up. He wakes up about 3 hours later. He's really groggy. Kind of has the munchies. Apparently goes into the kitchen, eats like 3 quarts of ice cream in one sitting, goes back to the couch, craps all over himself in the couch, passes back out. Meanwhile, Rob Kissell is allegedly seen in a community playroom in the apartment complex with his daughter. And it's alleged that he's fine. He doesn't seem groggy. He's playing. Everything's fine. Eventually takes his daughter and they go home. But he's never seen again. His coworkers get nervous because he had a very important business meeting called that night. And no matter what, Rob would show up. And this was a meeting that was really, really important to his company. And they'd been working on it for weeks to set it up. So when he doesn't make the call, doesn't log in for the call, he doesn't call to say he can't make the call or to reschedule the call. He doesn't show up for work the next day. His boss calls Nancy. And Nancy says, look, he's just going through some personal things. And the boss thought, you know, it doesn't matter what Rob's going through. Rob has never, ever let anything interfere with his work. So when nobody had heard from him after another couple of days, Rob's boss, manager, team leader, whatever you want to call him, decided to go ahead and call the authorities. The authorities show up at the apartment, and everything seems fine. Nancy's saying her husband had just left, and everything's fine, and the apartment is just spick and span, and the kids look great, and everything's fine. But the police say their intuition told them something wasn't right. They didn't like the way she was answering the question. And she didn't really have answers for why he hadn't shown up at work, where he had been for 4 days, and exactly where he was at that moment. And so they start going around, they want to go around the apartment. I'm sure they're looking for cameras, probably talking to neighbors. And they come across a worker, kind of a serviceman who worked at the apartments. And the service guy says, well, Mrs. Kissell, Nancy, had us move a rug down to the storeroom a couple of days ago. And it was so heavy that it took 4 of us to get it down there. And the police find this very interesting and go down to the storeroom, and lo and behold, they find Rob Kissell wrapped up in this huge oriental rug. He had been bludgeoned to death, said to have been extremely extreme, so much that there were openings where brain matter must have flown. They also found bags full of sheets and clothing that all had blood on them, and within 2 hours, Nancy was arrested. She was a wreck. They didn't take her to jail immediately. They, in fact, took her to a hospital, and she stayed in a like a maximum security part of the hospital until they could get a doctor to release her. Apparently, when word got out about this, Andrew, the father of the playmate, he made a call to the police. And he said, you know what? The last time I saw Rob, I was at the apartment. And Nancy had the girls give us milkshakes. And this is what happened to me after. You might want to do an autopsy on him. And the police said, well, thank you very much, mister. Nancy had drug. Of course, she denies this. Okay. I could say allegedly, except she's been convicted many times. This was also known as the infamous milkshake murder. It was one of Hong Kong's most highly profiled murders and trials of an expat that they'd ever had in their country at the time, in 2003. He was found with 5 different drugs in his system. And I don't think that they could test the father of the playmate, because by this time it had been 4 or 5 days since that had happened. But when somebody dies, their system stops flushing or working whatever's in it out. It stops. So whatever's in your system when you die is generally going to be there if they do an autopsy on you. And he had 5 different drugs in his. They were all sedatives. One was an antidepressant, but it had sedative, I don't want to say qualities, components. It had sedative components in it. And one of them was Rufinol, which is also known as the date rape drug. I can say date rape drug. The date rape drug, Roofie. So Nancy had her little affair that she was having with Michael, her long-distance love affair, really came back to bite her, because that spyware that Robert had installed on the home computer to catch her, well, when the police pulled that up, they also found a whole lot of searches for what prescription pills would, she specifically looked for prescription pills that would mimic a heart attack. Now, she later came and said, Nancy had a lot to say, but she later came and said that the reason that she had made those searches was she was so depressed and so desperate to get out of her marriage that she did the searches because she was going to commit suicide. And she didn't want her kids to know it was a suicide. She wanted them to think that it had been a heart attack. That's a hard pill to swallow, and I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. So Nancy had drugged Robert by having their six-year-old daughter give him that strawberry milkshake that was laced with those sedatives. She bludgeoned him. She kept him in the room for 2 days. Some people have said she kept him on the bed and slept next to him for those 2 days. Other people said that she went out the next day and bought a new Oriental rug. Other people said she wrapped him up in the rug, stuffed him in the closet until she could figure out what to do with him. If it took 4 servicemen to get him down to this storeroom, there was no way Nancy was going to be able to do it by herself, right? After her arrest, when she could leave the hospital and be interrogated and spoken to, Nancy said she admitted killing Robert, but she said she did it in self-defense. She said that she was a victim of domestic violence, that she had been a victim of domestic violence for well over 5 years, that everything had changed when they had moved to Hong Kong, that once they were in Hong Kong, Robert became a different person, that he became very addicted to cocaine, he started drinking heavily, that she accused him of having homosexual affairs when he would go on business trips. She accused him of being addicted to very deviant sex. And she said that when he would get high off the cocaine and get drunk and then get all wound up from pornography, or something set him off to make him angry, that she was repeatedly subjected to rape and sodomy. Now, let me tell you something. I'm just never going to say that somebody was not the victim of domestic violence. I'm just never going to say it. Because the domestic violence doesn't happen generally at the park or at the grocery store. It always happens behind closed doors. So you're just not going to hear me say that it didn't happen. But here's what I'm going to say. If Nancy Kissell was the victim of that, she really blew it when she got away from him and he couldn't leave. And she made it all the way from Hong Kong to Vermont. And he wasn't anywhere around. And she found a new man. And she didn't file for divorce. Because that would have been the time to do it. If you were a victim and you finally made it out, and he can't leave. He can't leave Hong Kong. Not with his job. If he could have left, he would have left with Nancy and the kids because of SARS. He had to stay. That was a perfect opportunity for her. So if she was a victim of domestic violence for years and years and years before she left Hong Kong and Robert because of SARS and made it all the way to Vermont, and the coast was clear, what the fuck was really wrong with her that she went back? It makes it a hard sell, is what I'm going to say. If you're going to use that as a defense, it makes it a hard sell. And it also makes it a hard sell that you killed him in self-defense when you drug him first. That's all I'm going to say. Now, it's also been alleged by her attorney that if he was abusing substances like cocaine and alcohol regularly, that his system would build up some kind of an immunity to other drugs. That you know, if he was drugged by Nancy in the milkshake, that it wouldn't affect him the way that it affected his neighbor Andrew, who it really took him out, right? But I would think it would have to, I mean, it's a roofie. You got roofied. You would have to be, I'm thinking, really high to be the only person to get roofied and not get roofied. Does that make sense? Everybody I've heard about this date rape drug, that's it, gonzo, for like 24 hours. And he had 4 other drugs in his system? I don't know. He must have been Superman. I don't know, man. That's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of stuff going on in there. And then he got crazy. The other guy's passed out on the couch, then eats 3 quarts of ice cream by himself, and then passes out and craps himself. But this one's still going. But Rob Kissell drank the same thing. He's still Mike Tyson in the bedroom. I don't know. I don't know, Nancy. I don't know, Nancy, if I buy that one. And nobody else did either. She finally went to trial in 2005 for the high court. She continued to maintain that it was self-defense. She did, and then she claimed memory loss. She said she really didn't remember hitting him 5 times with a heavy metal sculpture that belonged to her grandmother. By the way, it was a family heirloom. She admitted that she had used a sedative called Stilnox. I've never even heard of it. That's Nancy. That's Nancy and her mother leaving court one day. She changed quite a bit, didn't she? There's Nancy. There's Nancy before. And there's Nancy leaving court. Yeah, Trisha, it's possible. It doesn't so much bother me how many times she hit him, because I think if you have been a victim of domestic violence, and you have all that anger and that rage and fear and everything just kind of bubbles up all at once, I can see when you finally start to release it, you're just going to keep going and going and going, right? That part I can see. That part I could understand if that's what really happened. I just have a hard time believing that he was so aggressive on this one night when the other guy who had been drugged with essentially the same milkshake was gonzo. It's hard. That's a hard sell. It's a hard sell to believe that one person that drank the milkshake is, that's it, lights out. And the other one is chasing his wife around the bedroom, ready to rape her and beat her the same night. It's hard. And I think it was hard for the jury because they convicted her. She didn't admit to using a sedative called Stilnox, and it was found in her husband's body. And she said that originally she had started using that in Vermont, that she thought that it would make her husband less aggressive towards her and less aggressive towards the children. But she had taken it and ground it up and put it in a bottle of whiskey that he liked to drink. But then a couple days later, she could see where the pill, where she had the ground up pill, she could see that it had settled in the bottom of the whiskey bottle. So she didn't think that was a great idea. So she dumped that out, went and bought another bottle of whiskey and filled it up. But she said that she hadn't thought about it again until she was back in Hong Kong. And then she, again, allegedly was shopping around online for sedatives for herself, to kill herself, because the prescriptions that were in his body were all in her name. It took, trial took 65 days. Her parents went over there and his dad went over there for the trial. It took about 8 hours for them to convict, and she was given life in prison because that's like the automatic minimum sentence. It did get overturned eventually because technical errors, technical legal errors. And she was even offered the opportunity to make bail at one point. Hey, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear your part. The jury already came back. Always something from the peanut gallery. Always something from the peanut gallery. Nobody wants to hear about it. There's not even anybody out there. Be quiet. Oh my God. Talk about false alarm. Always something with those two. Always. She ultimately didn't even apply for bail. Of course, there was no money at this point. What happened was all the money went to the kids, right? And I don't know why you guys are laughing. I got to live with these knuckleheads. This is all the time. It's nonsense. It's nonsense. It's like they're spoiled rotten or something. I said he was worth about $18 million. That's a lot of money. I didn't do the math on here. We can do it. What what would $18 million in 2003 be worth today? Let's see. What do you guys think? Do you guys think about double? What would $18 million in 2003 be worth today? Oh, God. What do you guys think? Everybody's probably looking. Yeah, it'd be worth like $30 million. Almost, yeah, 30.5. I was going to say almost 31. That's a lot of money. These kids were really little. And initially, they went to Nancy's father, Ira. Ira had remarried. He was much older. Rob was 40 when he was murdered. Nancy was 39. And eventually, Ira was even, what do I want to say? He was like a co-trustee on the will to make sure that the kids' money was taken care of. Ira and Rob got along very, very good. Rob, in fact, had said that it was easier for him to talk to and relate to Ira than it was to his own dad, Bill. And so Ira takes these kids, these little kids, and eventually he says, you know, it's just too much for me. It's just, I took on more than I should have taken on with the kids. And so Ira sends the kids to live with Nancy's half-brother, his son, who was attending, 24 years old. This kid was 24. I don't know what's happening, but there's about to be some true crime on the True Crime Channel. Now, get in here and talk nonsense. Do you want to be a case on the True Crime Channel? Do you want to be a case on the True Crime Channel? Do you? I don't think so. It's about to go down. It's about to go live. True Crime on the True Crime Channel. Yeah, it's just a mess. Ronnie, right? Ronnie then says, why didn't she just get a divorce? It's just a mess. I think money makes people crazy. She didn't want half, but she wanted it all. Maybe she needed it all. Her lover was living in a trailer park, for God's sake. So he wasn't going to provide the lifestyle that Rob had provided for her, that she was very, very much accustomed to at that point, right? But I don't know. You know, we see this over and over with these true crime cases, don't we? Where the greed just really overtakes common sense. Your own, it's like, I was going to say, it overtakes your sense of survival, because she could have survived just fine on half of 18 million. And she probably would have got alimony and child support on top of it, right? She could have survived just fine. She could have survived better than she's surviving now in prison in Hong Kong for the rest of her life, right? Her and her little boyfriend could have made do. But it's almost like a warped sense of survival comes in. Or entitlement. I know, but we see it over and over and over. And I've asked it, why don't you just leave? And what really boggles my mind is she had left. She'd left with his blessing. It's not even like she had to sneak out in the middle of the night and make a getaway, right? It wasn't like sleeping with the enemy. She had to like fake her death and take off. I mean, she made a clean getaway and then went back. And her boyfriend, even though she had spoken to him on the phone right before and right after the murder, there was no way of proving that he had any knowledge of it, though I bet you he did. I bet you he did. But there was no proof. And so he was never implicated. And Nancy, in fact, would just write him pages of love letters every day. And he rebounded pretty quickly. He got remarried for the third time, and said that he and his new wife would read her love letters together, and she finally caught on and stopped writing him. But for the life of me, I can't figure out why she went back, because what a tragedy. And I will say this, there could be some truth in what she's saying. When the police went in, you remember he had that spyware installed on the home computers. When the police went in and looked at search history and what had been happening on those home computers, yes, they found the emails from Nancy to Michael, her lover electrician. But they also found a lot of pornography, a lot of deviant sexual acts, and a lot of homosexual pornography. So, could he have been having homosexual affairs when he went on business trips? Maybe. There was certainly that pornography on the computers, and I don't think Nancy put it there because she didn't know about the spyware. She did say that he was into some very deep, it is interesting, right? So this is what I'm saying, sometimes even in the biggest, most outlandish of lies, there's usually a kernel of truth somewhere. And we don't know. I mean it, miss. I mean it, miss. There's not even anybody out there. This must be a cat or something out there. Nancy didn't know about the spyware on the computer. So why would she go put that up there? And it also, remember I said earlier that I had read that Robert had allegedly offered to bring her lover to Hong Kong? And I thought, whoa, that is just really, wow. Well, then I got to thinking after I took everything into consideration, and I thought, well, that would certainly be a good distraction if he was dabbling in other things. Maybe. I don't know. What do you guys think? So, she's in prison for the rest of her life. Robert is dead. He's buried back in the States. His children went to Ira, Nancy's father. Ira couldn't handle them after a little bit, and Ira sent the kids to live with his 24-year-old son, who was in medical school. God love him. This kid that's in medical school. And Andrew throws a fit. Andrew Robert's brother comes out of the woodwork for these kids. And now he wants to fight for the kids. And even his dad's impressed. Even Bill says, maybe Andrew is going to kind of evolve as the family hero for once. Because remember, Andrew had always been he was always outshined by Robert. I think he was the black sheep, and Robert was the golden child out of the boys. Jane, their younger sister, was living in Washington State at this point, and Bill had relocated to Florida. He had retired there. Elaine, their mother, was dead. Robert was dead. Nancy is in prison for the rest of her life, though going through appeal after appeal after appeal and just getting reconvicted and reconvicted and reconvicted. Ira, Nancy's father, was no longer an option. I really don't know why Nancy's mother never stepped in. But Andrew and his wife, Haley, go and fight for these children. And it really does appear to be really benevolent. It just appears to be an older brother, doing the right thing for the children of his dead little brother. Until we really start to get to know Andrew. You remember, Andrew he's become a real estate developer. He had started a business right out of high school. He went to college for a little bit, and then he started to do some real estate deals and started making some really good money off of them. He met his wife, Haley, and she Haley came from a very wealthy family, had a very good, very privileged upbringing. Her father was CEO of a company that was worth something like $500 million. And she was, if I remember, she was in finances. She did I think she was an investment. She did financial investments for people. She was pretty savvy. And they got together. They got married within a couple of years, had some kids after that. And then in the early 90s, they moved into a co-op in New York, in Manhattan, to be exact, off of Upper East Side, right, off East 74th, and had a sprawling apartment. Andrew eventually works his way onto the board of that co-op. And then from there, he works his way into treasurer of the co-op board. And for convenience, Andrew begins having all of the co-op's bank statements and bills and all the checks and everything are sent to him directly. They don't go through anybody else. They just come to him and he handles things. He's the treasurer, but he's still on the board, so he can vote for improvements around the building and things like that, right? And when he votes for improvements around the building, he then, as treasurer, takes it upon himself to hire the companies, pays them, make sure the work is done, and all only going through him. He buys the apartment above theirs. He buys an apartment next door to his and Haley's apartment. He has them turned into one palatial palace. All three of those become one huge apartment for Andrew and his wife and their children. And he's getting a lot. Miss Man. You know what? That's it. That's it. Now I have a co-host since you have so much to say. So, yeah. So, what happens? Good old Andrew. Nobody can quite figure out exactly what he does or where he gets all of his money, but he sure seems to have a lot of it. And again, he's buying apartment buildings. He's going to neighbors and family, and he's getting investments to buy these properties. Some of them he allegedly flips. Others he just fixes them up. And he's paying everybody like clockwork for their investments, right? Like clockwork. Nobody ever misses a payment. But while he really had autonomy over the co-op's finances. He went and arranged like a refinancing of the building because he said that he wanted to create a reserve fund to pay for some renovation for the building. But some of the other board members who were also tenants started to question how in the world a hallway renovation at the co-op could possibly cost $1 million. So they had a meeting and they wanted to see the receipts and the bank statement. And what was uncovered, yeah, oh boy is right. What was uncovered was that good old Andrew, who had horses and art, Ferraris and Porsches and a wife in finance and children, and he had stake in an olive oil company, and he had a yacht, 80-foot yacht, and buildings all over. He had siphoned money out of the co-op's account to fund his lifestyle and to also make payments, to help him make payments to the people that he had talked into investing with him. And what is that known as? Called a Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from here, though generally in a classical Ponzi scheme. You just keep getting new investors so that you can keep making the payments to the old investors, and they don't know that their money hasn't actually been invested, that it's just been spent on your lifestyle. That's a classic Ponzi scheme. Andrew had a Ponzi scheme with a twist because he had a new investor, all right, with the co-op, but the co-op didn't know that it was an investor because he was just forging and siphoning and stealing and defrauding, and he was clever about it. This guy that always wanted to take all the shortcuts probably had enough smarts to have gone the straight and narrow route and might have been more successful than his brother. He had created fake companies that he would then look like he would hire those companies to do the work around the co-op, and then he'd pay those companies. But all of those companies went back to him. He did hire legit people, probably kind of legit people, right, to do the work. There was some work done, but the work wasn't worth $1 million. Probably maybe 200, 300 in supplies and work, and then aesthetics to make it look really fancy. All the rest went to him. So the board confronted him because he'd forged statements. He embezzled. Sometimes he didn't even bother to go through. Because how many times can you say, we're going to renovate this and we're going to redo this and this needs to be remodeled? He couldn't do that all the time. So eventually he just started straight up embezzling. And he straight up embezzled to the tune of $3.9 million. And the board came to him. And at first he was really flustered. And he's allegedly making phone calls, right, to his accountant. But are you sure that these are the right statements? And did you mess up the statements for my apartment building over here with the co-op? But nobody was buying it at this point. So what he did was he finally fessed up. He just said, look. I'll pay you back 4.7. Just don't go public with this. Just don't go to the police with it. And I'm going to pay you back. Well, where did a guy who embezzled and stole and defrauded and scammed almost $5 million, where does he come up with 4.7 to pay it back? Well, he's going to steal it from somebody else. I mean, am I the only person that thinks that he's going to go steal it from somebody else to pay back the money that he stole from these guys? So they actually enter into a civil agreement. It's all very hush hush, but like he signs, he's going to pay it back. He does pay them back. They don't go public with it. Not really sure where he got the money, but have some ideas. Andrew had bought a lot of real estate over the years. And what he would do when he would get the real estate was, and listen, a lot of people that are real estate investors do this. They do it very legit. You buy a property, a home, a building, whatever it is, and you build up some equity in it. And depending on what the state of the market is, you turn around and refinance and take that equity and buy another property. And that's how people become real estate moguls, right? But it takes a little bit of time to build up that equity in your properties so that you can take enough out. Because when you refinance and take that equity out, now your commitment to the bank every month, your mortgage payment's going to be higher on the first property. And you've now got a payment for the second property. But you've got to take enough out, right, for a down payment. Well, good old Andrew, he didn't really want to wait that long. He didn't really want to wait to build up equity, and he didn't really see why he would need to. I mean, after all, he had a woman that worked for him for years and years and years that was also a notary public. And when she left, he somehow got his hands on her notary stamp. Now, I used to be a notary, and I will tell you, it is a big deal if you lose your notary stamp. If you lose your notary stamp, or somebody gets a hold of it, or you even think that somebody has used it, you have to call the Secretary of State. You have to report it. Because a notary can virtually do anything. Wills, deeds. If you have a notarized statement and you take it to the court that says that somebody's transferred their property to you and it's notarized, a notary is there's like a representative. They're just believed, and they've been trained and they've been tested that they know the procedures and are going to do the right thing. And you have a logbook that has to be signed, and you have to log every single transaction that you've done with that notary stamp has to be there. But if something's notarized and it's taken to the court, it's as long as nobody stands up and makes a claim about it, it's as good as gold. And why she didn't report her stamp missing? Maybe I mean, he was pretty clever. Maybe he made a claim for needing a new stamp. I know when I was a notary years and years and years ago, you could get a notary stamp that required a actual ink pad, or you could get a self-inking stamp. And a self-inking stamp, it's only going to last so long. Maybe she had one of those, and maybe he said, "Oh, need another one," right? It's a possibility, but somehow she didn't report it, and he got a hold of that stamp. And what he started to do was bank fraud, bank and mortgage fraud. Rather than wait to build up equity in his property and his real estate investments, Andrew would forge bank documents saying that the mortgage and the bank loan for property A and B and C and D and E have all been satisfied. All of those deeds were completely in the clear, that the bank had no hold over them anymore. And all of those were notarized by a bank employee who was a notary. Now, what did he gain by doing that? Well, I'll tell you what he gained. Instead of maybe only having 30, 40, 50, 60,000 in equity built up on a property to use, he now might have a property worth $500,000 or $600,000 that on paper appeared to be completely in the clear, which means he could offer that property deed to another bank as collateral and get that whole $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 to work with. That's a lot bigger than working with 30, 40, 50, 60 in equity, right? What happened was he did this in 3 different states. Somebody was just doing an innocent audit and happened to come across 2 or 3 of these deeds and new loan applications. for Andrew and his properties within a very short time period, and just happened to catch that it was all the same notary. And this person could not figure out why banks in other states were all using the same notary in Connecticut, until they, of course, went to their superior and they began to do an investigation. And then they went to the FBI because, oh my goodness, because mortgages and money in banks, it's FDIC insured here in the United States, which means that's federally insured. Hey, so that means if somebody robs the bank or defrauds you, hey, that's it. Get down. I know you hear somebody working out there, but you can't see them, you just hear them. Ugh, it just never ends. So, I'm going to learn how to knit so I can knit you muzzles. So you're not just stealing from the bank, you're stealing from the government. Because if a bank gets defrauded, they lost customers' money. And the customers' money is insured by the government. And all that was tied up in fraud. And it crossed state lines. So the feds were coming for him. They were coming for him. Right about this time, you know, his wife, Haley, she was really in the dark of why they suddenly up and left the co-op. He actually took off through a service elevator and then called his wife and said, I found us a new place and I'm going to be here setting it up. He turned around and bought some land by forging her name on some bank documents. And he bought land and was going to have a dream home built. And while that was happening in Connecticut, which isn't far from New York, while that was happening, he found them a rental for $14,000 a month in Connecticut. So he comes up with whatever excuse that he's going to come up with about why he suddenly had to leave and why he's going to be in Connecticut and her and the kids need to come join him. And then she finds out about everything. And listen, they sold their apartment for a hefty amount because they had combined 3 apartments to make one, remember? And you know, in Manhattan, that went for something. But when she found out what he had done, she started taking 10 flights of stairs down to get out of the building rather than risk getting on the elevator with him. Or not with him, but coming across somebody that lived there, because everybody on the board lived there. She couldn't face them, even though she didn't have anything to do with it. But she thought that would be probably a pretty hard sell because she had worked in finance. But she didn't know anything. And when she found out that he had forged her name, she was about at the end of her tether. Because for years, she had been putting up with his crap. Now, where Nancy had alleged that Robert had begun using cocaine and was having affairs in Hong Kong, well, that was common knowledge about Andrew in the States for their whole marriage. And Haley was talking to Andrew's sister about it in emails, and she was upset. She said, my God, taking care of 5 kids is brutal. And I'm doing it all by myself while he's on the phone with her all day or taking her shopping. I'm up feeding these 5 kids, getting them to school, going to 5 parent-teacher conferences, 5 school plays, uh, soccer practice, whatever it is. I got to take Rob's 3 kids have to go to therapy. I got to do that and get home and have dinner for all of them ready every night. And he's off running around, buying Ferraris, buying yachts, and talking to his mistress. It was common knowledge that Andrew did drugs and cheated. So she was at the end of her tether. And at one point, after she had found out that he had forged her name, and she couldn't believe the peril, the financial peril that he had put this family in while she's taking care of his dead brother's kids. Which, by the way, his first invoice, if you will, against the trust for the children was $171,000. Now, granted, those kids, they were worth about $5-6 million a piece. They were really set for life if the money was handled correctly. And there was afforded about $8,000 a month just for regular care expenses of the kids. I bet if there was additional things required, you would just supply the receipts to the trust to get reimbursed for them. So now you kind of have to wonder, now that we know what we know about Andrew, did he really take the kids in as some kind of benevolent act for his dead brother? Or did he see those kids as another source of income that he could play with? I know what we all want to think. We all want to think, what a good guy. No, there must have been something good in that guy. He wouldn't do that to those kids who had already lost so much, right? I don't know. Well, guess what? Here comes the feds for Andrew. And they pick him up, and he's pretty screwed. He's got fraud charges, embezzlement charges. They even find out about what he did to the co-op. And even though the co-op had decided they weren't going to prosecute, the Fed said, oh no, we're going to prosecute him for that too. Because that's what the feds will do in this country. They're not going to arrest you for one thing. They're going to pile every single thing that they think they can on top of there, because they're going to get a conviction somehow. When you hear about people being prosecuted by federal prosecutors in the United States, you don't hear about them getting prosecuted and convicted and going to prison for like one count. It's like 30 counts of something, right? It's pretty tough. So that happens, and Haley says that's enough. She's had enough. You know, she'd been emailing Jane, his sister. She said, this is just ridiculous. You know, I can't believe he did this to me. I can't believe he did this to the kids. He's a thief. He's a fraud. He's a cheat. She said, you know, in bed last night, I actually could picture myself just pummeling him, just pummeling him to death, and enjoying every single hit. Trust me, that email came out. Haley says, enough's enough. Now the feds are coming. But Haley has a little compassion. She knows that Andrew's going to go away for a long time. And so when Andrew gets arrested, Haley, he's arrested, but he's offered, well, he gets $1 million bail. So that would either have to be cash or it would have to be $1 million in assets that would have to be put up. And Haley went and did it. And he got an ankle bracelet, and he went home with Haley to the house that they were renting in Greenwich, and he had to stay there. He could leave to take the kids to school in the morning, but he had to get court approval for all of that. And they fought bitterly. But Haley felt that he was looking at a minimum of 8 years and up to 20. And trust me, when they got a conviction, the feds were coming for all the assets, because all that stuff's going to be sold at auction. Because you have to find a way for victims of financial crimes. You have to find a way to make them whole again. Ronnie Lund says he went to the Bernie Madoff School of Criminality. Might have, and he might have gotten an idea from Bernie. I'm going to tell you about that in a little bit. The day before he was arrested, he signed their vacation home in Vermont. He signed it all the way over to Haley. And Haley, not knowing that he's about to get arrested, thought, wow. Yeah, this is the other brother. This is Andrew. This is Andrew Kissell, Rob's brother. That's why him and his wife have Rob's kids. She thought, wow, he knows how much I love that house and how much it would mean for me to have it only in my name, especially because they were going to get a divorce. He was hiding assets. And I think it ended up turning out that he'd refinanced that house. I think there was something screwed up with that house too, because nothing that he touched, if he could get his hands on something, if he had access to it, he was just gonna take it dry. He was just gonna wring you can't get blood out of a turnip is a saying, right? I bet you old Andrew could, because he was going to take everything he could get out of anything that was within reach. So I don't think that property, honestly, was completely free. But Haley thought that it was. And I think he knew he was going to be arrested. And when he signed that home over to her, I think he probably thought it would grease the wheels for her to bail him out. And that's what she did. Because if she had said he can't come home, because he had to be at home on house arrest, then he wouldn't have gotten out. But the feds were coming, and they had to do something pretty quick. And so the house that they were living in, that house for $14,000 a month, well, good old Andrew, he stops paying rent on it. And at $14,000 a month, it took about 6 months for that to wind its way through the landlord-tenant court system. But eventually the landlord was going to get a kick-out order. And so Andrew and Haley, well, they had to move. But they still did have access to some money every month because they had Rob's kids. And those kids had $15, $16, $17 million. sitting in a trust for their care. So they probably could justify the need for housing expenses, right? In March of 2006, Haley and the kids move out, and Andrew decides he's going to stay. He is about a week away. He's gone ahead. He's made a deal with the feds. He's going to work with them, which kind of leads you to believe when you hear that a defendant in a case like this has agreed to work with the feds. Well, it kind of leads you to believe that they probably there's probably another defendant out there someplace that the feds don't know about. Because if Andrew was the only person committing all of this financial fraud, there'd be nothing for him to work with the feds about. They already have him. They have him dead to rights. So when you hear that he's going to work with the feds, it leads you to believe he's going to roll over on somebody to try to save himself. Because he's looking at a maximum of 20 and a minimum of 8 in the federal penitentiary. With the federal system, you don't do half. He's going to do 10 months out of every one of those years. He's only going to get 2 months off a year for good time, if he's good. And with Andrew, what are the odds of that? I don't know, Andy. We want to give you the benefit of the doubt, but I don't know, Andy. I don't know if you have it in you, brother, to go straight and narrow. I don't know. Haley gets a place, and her and the kids are going to leave, and Andrew comes up for some reason that he needs to stay. He's going to stay for a little while. Just run it out, I guess, stay as long as he possibly can. Haley's leaving on a Friday. The movers are supposed to come on Sunday. The movers show up. Andrew's still there, and Haley's pissed. She's like, "What are you doing? We got to get out of here. I mean, the cops are going to show up and lock us out pretty soon." And whatever happens, she decides to leave him a bed that he can sleep in. But then the movers are going to come back on Monday and pick that up. And he's just got to come. And when the movers show up to the mansion to go ahead and finish the move, they can't find him anywhere. And they begin going through the house, looking to make sure that they've gotten all the furniture. And when they get down to the basement, they find Andrew Kissell's body. His hands and feet are bound. He is essentially tied to a chair, like a folding chair, if you will. His t-shirt has been pulled over his face. Each of his feet are bound to a separate chair leg, and his hands are bound behind him and behind the chair back, and he's been stabbed to death. There's no signs of break-in. And he's all the way in the basement. I mean, the police they're stumped. Because what was he doing in the basement? I mean, if somebody broke into the house, first of all, there's not much in there. Most of the furniture had been taken by the movers the day before. If somebody broke in and saw an essentially empty. I think it was like 8,000 square feet, this home was. Why would they bother to go down to the basement? So it led the police to believe, though they didn't know, that, I mean, this wasn't just a random breaking and entering where they stumbled, the burglars stumbled across somebody in the house and then killed him. It's that the murder had to have been the intent for going into the house in the first place. And that's what the police thought. Now, this is the house. Look at that house. That's massive. And so the police, knowing, I mean, everybody kind of knew what Andrew was going through, they thought, well, look, it's probably like one of two things, right? Because he obviously didn't kill himself. He didn't stab himself with his hands bound behind his back and his t-shirt pulled over his head and his feet tied to a chair. He didn't do that. So either it's somebody that he screwed over, right? Who thought that that prison was too good for him. Or it was somebody he was going to tell on. And that's, I mean, those are kind of, well, hold on. I'm going to say those are the only two theories that the police had to go on, but no. Because guess what happened? Andrew comes up dead, and old Sister Jane in Washington State pops up and goes, you better talk to his wife, because I got one doozy of an email from her not too long ago. Y'all remember that email? Where she said, I could just kill him. I was laying in bed last night, right next to him, picturing doing it. So they go talk to Haley, but she's cleared pretty quickly. So then they start to try to figure out who was the last person that saw him. And what they came up with, Andrew, he had employees. And he was very generous. He was extremely generous. Well, of course he was generous with his employees, because he was, he had a nonstop supply of money that he was stealing, I guess. Right? He wasn't convicted, so we have to say allegedly. He wasn't convicted because, like Bernie Madoff, old Bernie died before he got convicted or could give a guilty plea in court, remember? And if you die before you're convicted or you plead guilty in the United States, you're not guilty, because the court process wasn't finished, and they can't finish it without you. And so that's why I say that maybe old Andrew took a note out of Bernie Madoff's book, because Andrew died before he pled guilty. So he was never convicted of the crimes, which left a lot of the property safe. The feds were able to go in and seize some property. They went in and got the yacht. They found they had a 1957 Mercedes. that was worth over $400,000. So if anybody remembers the show Knight Rider, you remember the show Knight Rider? And the car was Kit, and the car would always talk to him. And I guess it was a Pontiac Trans Am, right? Kit was. And I guess on the set of Knight Rider, they used 4 different Pontiacs to actually film the TV series. And he had one of them. And they got a hold of that. And because he did have, even though he died without being convicted of all the bank fraud, this guy still owed a legit $30 million to different creditors. He owed them. And it was legit. So the feds went in and started seizing stuff to pay that off. And if you have the money to go to an auction where the government has seized property, oh, you're going to get some deals. You're going to get some deals. Listen, I have like an $1,100 ring. I don't know how many carats it is with diamonds going all the way around it, stuff, right? And it comes with the car. I mean, I've got all the documents of the appraisal value and everything for it. I paid like $75 for it at a federal auction online. Crazy. I got like $5,000 worth of jewelry at a federal auction for $300, $400. So that's, and there was art and land, and I mean, nice art. Okay, crazy stuff. So if you've got some cash laying around and you can go to a federal auction, you can pick up some investments. And that's what I bought the jewelry for, just for investments, because worst case scenario, I'm going to sell it for at least double the $300-400 I put in, right? But if you have a lot more money than what I had to go in and do that, you can pick up a yacht, a house, land, cars. I saw some unbelievable stuff at these auctions. They're really fat. They're actually really, really, really cool. But they got the Knight Rider car, and somebody turned around and bought it for like $20,000. And then that person turned around and put it on eBay at a starting bid of $20,000. And somebody that knew this guy named George Harris, who had actually created Kit for the series, he created the car. A friend of his ended up buying the car. So, meanwhile, there's another custody battle going on for Robert Kissell's kids, his 3 kids. I mean, these poor kids. They might have money if there's anything left, and hopefully there's something left now that Andrew's out of the picture, right? But these poor kids. Of course, their dad is murdered by their mom. And God help that little one. God help that little girl that carried the milkshake to her dad. Even though she didn't know. She was only 6. That's got to mess with you. Then dad's dead, mom's in prison for killing him for the rest of her life. And you go to your maternal grandfather's, he can't help you. Then you go to your half uncle, and he can't take care of you. And then you go to your uncle, your dead dad's brother, and his wife to live with them, and then your uncle turns up murdered. And now you're in another custody battle within 3 years. Jane goes after Haley for custody of the kids. The police still don't know what happened to Andrew. Haley's trying to hold on to the kids. She says, I read this. I don't know if it's true. I read that Haley said, "No, I'm not gonna let go of the kids because I'm not gonna end up out on the street. And at least if I have the kids, I know that I'll always have some place to live." I don't know if she said it. You know, when you're in custody battles and divorce and family fights and arguments, I mean, we talked about family arguments yesterday in the positive affirmations. I mean, some outlandish accusations get made, right? And people say terrible, horrible things to try to sway a judge's opinion. And so I don't know that Haley said that. I don't know why she would have to say that. She did come from a very well-off family. And also, you have to remember these brothers, Rob and Andrew, right? They didn't come from nothing themselves, right? These guys, their dad, he had some money too. So I don't think anybody between Haley's dad and the kids' grandparents, I don't think that either set of grandparents would have let anything happen to the person taking care of those kids. And I think with or without, even if Haley was only taking care of her and Andrew's children, her family and Bill, Andrew and Robert's dad would have made sure that they were okay. And I don't think she needed Rob's 3 kids. As a matter of fact, it's probably the last thing she needed with that kind of stress. 5 kids, right? And now another murder. And the police talking to you. And now infighting in the family. Jane eventually did end up with Rob's 3 kids. And they did move to Washington State to live with her. So we just have to hope that all went well with them, and that when they became of age, there was some money left for them, because their father was killed in 2003, and they probably, so that was 21 years ago, so they're probably all of age. But yeah, what terrible, terrible, terrible trauma to go through. Meanwhile, the police they're still stumped as to what happened to Andrew and why. They really had no leads. But in 2008, Andrew Kissell's chauffeur, Carlos Trujillo, was arrested along with 2 of his cousins, Leonard and War Trujillo. They were all arrested in March of 2008, so almost 2 years after Andrew Kissell's death. And this happened after police followed up on a credit card that they found when they searched Carlo Trujillo's residence. And when they arrested these guys and interviewed them, they got told about the murder plot. And this is what the 3 cousins told them. Andrew Kissell knew he was going away, going to be gone go away for a long time. And he was pretty sure, because I'm pretty sure his attorney told him, once you plead guilty, the feds are coming and taking everything. And they don't care about your kids. And they don't care about your wife. And they don't care. They're taking everything because you're going to be a felon. And you have victims. And the feds are prosecuting you for the victims. They don't care about your kids. Everything's going, buddy. Everything. And you don't have time to hide it. Because they'll find that. They will. If they get tipped off that money, property, stuff like that has been transferred, they'll follow up on it for sure. They're going to hunt down that money. And so allegedly what happened was Andrew had been laundering money through Carlos and his one cousin, and which probably was the credit card, probably was what the credit card was used for. And Andrew also had taken out an insurance policy. But if he committed suicide, there's no insurance policy. There's no insurance company in the world that is going to pay for somebody that committed suicide. They're not going to do it. So what he did was, sure, he hired Carlos Trujillo, who turned around and went to his cousins Leonard and War to kill him. So it was a suicide for hire instead of a murder for hire. He did hire them to murder him because he wanted his children to benefit from the insurance policy that he had. And if he was murdered, that was the only way. So good old Andrew, he found a way to stick it to him on the way out too. And boy, these guys rolled on each other. So that was Carlos. Carlos right here was, yeah. But just like, I cannot even imagine what their father, their mom was dead. God rest her soul, thank God. I cannot even imagine their father, Bill. I just can't imagine. So the cousins rolled over on each other pretty good. And it's generally when you have a couple defendants like this, it's kind of it's whose attorney is smart enough to convince their client to make a deal with the prosecution first is going to get the lesser sentence. And Carlos Trujillo, the chauffeur, he's the one that said Andrew was, like a father to him, blah, 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 blah. He was charged with murder and attempted murder. He was acquitted of the murder charge. I think he worked with the prosecutors. I think he threw his cousin under the bus because he pled guilty to attempted murder. I don't know how there's an attempted murder when someone's dead. You didn't attempt it. That ain't an attempted death. That's dead. So it's usually with co-defendants, how somebody is convicted of an attempted murder, if they say, yeah, okay, he was stabbed. Let's say he was stabbed 20 times. I stabbed once, but he was still alive. And Leonard did the rest. And he was dead by the time Leonard was done. So that's generally the route they'll try to take, because they can't prove who stabbed who and who, if there's two co-defendants, who was the one that actually finished them off. They can't tell that. So it's whoever runs to the prosecution first is going to get the deal. And so Carlos was, he was acquitted of the murder. He was allowed to plead guilty to attempted murder, and he got 6 years in prison. And then he was deported. He was deported out of the country back to Colombia, because you don't get to stay after you do that. And Leonard, his cousin, Leonard pled guilty to manslaughter and to conspiracy to commit murder. And he testified against Carlos, but it didn't seem to matter because Leonard got 20 years. So he, I imagine, is still in there, or maybe just getting ready for parole. So what? Now listen, this is the movie. This is the movie, if you can find it. The Two Mr. Kissells. And you can see John Stamos up there. He plays Andrew. And the other guy, I don't know what his name is. He plays Rob. And Robin Tunney plays Nancy Kissell, the old milkshake maker. And it is fantastic if you can find it wherever you are. Okay, I mean, I highly recommend it. I saw it probably 15 years ago, and I looked and looked and looked and looked everywhere for it, and I couldn't find it. So what? I mean, what the fuck? Did you guys see the twists and turns of this? And these brothers were murdered 2.5 years apart. These guys. Look at these guys. Everything going for them. Everything going for them. How did they end up murdered? 3 years apart. One in Hong Kong, one in the States. You've got to catch the movie if you can, okay? Listen, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for hanging in there. It was a long one because there was so much we had to talk about. I will see you next week with another case, okay? As always, thank you for joining me. I hope I brought you something that you didn't know about before, that you found really intriguing and eye-opening, and something that you didn't see coming. And thank you for joining and staying tuned. You all stayed tuned throughout it, so it must have been all right. Find that movie if you can. Find it. I appreciate all of you, and I will see you. If you don't have anything better to do, I'll see you right here next week. Okay? Thank you, guys. Thank you. I couldn't do it without you. I wouldn't do it without you.